Welcome to Life After Faith, and I am joined today by Chris Mallard.
Yes.
What's going on, Chris?
Hey, man, just living a life.
Okay. I always have to ask because I don't know how people know me or how I know people sometimes. Have we ever met in person?
No, we have not met in person.
Okay.
But me growing up in the era of hip hop,
Uh-huh.
being a Christian, a devout Christian, I may add, not a fake
Okay.
Christian, a devout Christian.
We'll dive into all that.
Yeah, I still had a connection to culture, like,
Hmm.
just the culture of my time, of my generation. So
Okay.
hip hop was a really big thing, but as a Christian, I was starving
Mm.
for wanting to be connected to the culture, but within my context of
Gotcha.
faith.
Okay.
So when you guys came on the scene,
Mm.
I was just so elated, like, yes. And the content is what
Mm.
growing up, music has always been about the content and the lyrics as
Okay.
opposed to just the beat.
Right.
So when you guys came with the content, oh,
Mm.
I was like, man, I
So
was
it
sold.
it was Christian rap, and it was meaty Christian rap.
There you go.
Yeah,
It was
it
meaty.
was,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm not
It-
going to name names of other artists who were not meaty, but it was theologically meeting, not
okay.
just meeting, but
So you were a Christian, and even when it wasn't culturally appealing to you, you still were in it. And then at some point you said, wait, you could actually marry it with the culture. And then it was like, oh my God, like it clicked even more at that point.
yeah, I mean, because so just to give you a backdrop, my ministry was just the foundation. I mean, I was constantly around young people. I was
Mm,
young.
okay.
My ministry group was young. I mean,
Hmm.
so we were just that group, that generation of Christians who
Yeah.
were still, like we were young. We wanted to feel like we
Right.
were part of it,
Right.
but not in it. A
Mm,
part, you know what I'm saying? We were
yep.
we,
In
we were
but
still
not of.
cool, Serving Jesus was
Yeah.
still cool, you know what
Right.
I'm saying? So yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, man. Cross movement had that it filled that space for a lot of people. And even to this day, even though I don't amen anything that I said while I was rapping now, there's still a part of me that's like, man, that's a rich part of history, the way that we
Hmm.
merged culture and faith and what that
Hmm.
meant for so many people. But let's talk about the faith, because this is life after faith, which means you're only on this program if you have what they call apostatized. Um, Somebody challenged me on Facebook today, actually a former guest. He did a life after faith episode, Chris. Um, he did a life after faith episode, and he challenged me on Facebook saying deconverting is not really a good term because it sort of lends credence to the idea that something metaphysical happened in the first place. Like you got converted, like you had this spiritual experience. I'm like, y'all got to think about that, because
Hmm.
when I say deconverted, I'm not at all lending any steam to the idea that something metaphysical happened. I'm just talking about going from a position of not believing to believing. And he was like, well, yeah, that's cool. But when you say converted and deconverted, people think, oh, you had like something spiritual happen to you. So anyway,
Yeah.
um, but
Makes sense
you
though
you
when you think
had,
about it.
yeah, I appreciated it. I'm not sure how I'm going to, if I'm going to live in light of it, because like I said, I don't mean the metaphysical thing, but
Hmm.
I think there's a conversation to be had there. But either way, you had the quote unquote born again experience.
Oh yeah.
But then after a certain amount of time, and we'll get into all that, you no longer believe. You apostatize. You deconverted, as I say. You left the Christian faith.
Yeah.
So let's talk about. Let me just ask you this, because I always do this on these Life After Faith episodes. There's some people who don't care to prove to others that you actually were a believer. And I always try to give space for the person that's watching and saying, he probably wasn't really a Christian. What was his testimony? What was his? So I always give people a chance to kind of flash the badge to show that you really were in. Um, I'm going to ask you to do that, but I'm curious, do you even care if people say to you, you probably was never even in the first place?
Uh, at this point in my life, no, I don't
Oh,
care.
okay.
But for those who would critique or
Hmm.
criticize or just, that will peep in on your platform to find whatever they're trying to find, or just they want to know.
Yeah.
I think it matters that those who are apostates or are deconverting do share their story and their encounters, so that those who are still maybe in the faith will have that to remember, like based on their confession at the they were Christians.
I like when people have to reckon with, wait, that sounds like my experience. Like
exactly
the way he told his testimony, like I got one of those.
Exactly.
So that's another good thing about people telling their testimony. But let's dive into it.
Okay.
How did you come to faith?
Yeah, so I'll try to be as concise, because this could be
I'm going to ask follow-up questions anyway. So you be concise. Okay. I'm going to draw it out. So
okay, so I will say this: I have not prepared mentally for this conversation. I did that on purpose. Like I didn't try to premeditate anything. I was like, you know what? This is going to be a very authentic and organic conversation.
I like it.
Between two former Christians.
I like it.
And so like I said, when we had spoken about the meeting, I was like, I'm going to do me, like, as far as relax. I'm not going to, what I'm going to say, because I've seen, other, deconversion interviews you've had with others. And I said, no, I want to be organic as they were. At least I assume that they were organic.
Yeah.
So I will talk about me before becoming a Christian. It's the idea of God started early in me as a child.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about my imagination, because that's what I'll call it. I had imagined a God in my head before I can really start writing.
Wow.
And I'll explain what I mean by that.
I got questions already.
So I can remember vividly, and my mother can recount for what I'm saying, because she still has I don't know if you remember the paper that when you first learned how to write in manuscript,
those lines,
the little dotted lines and everything.
Yeah.
My mother still has the papers.
Okay.
After 40, I'll be 50 soon.
Okay.
So for about 40 years, she's had these papers, and she's telling me this today. Or she just keeps a lot of things. But anyway, I remember specifically writing, because in our writing assignment, I have a pretty decent memory. I'm not saying that I can remember everything precisely, but I can tell you that this is authentic and true. That I remember writing a letter. We were supposed to write a letter to our family members, as to show them what, our improvement in manuscript. So I wrote a letter to God.
How old?
I remember I was, let's say, 7.
Okay.
I wrote a letter to God. I remember saying, "Dear God, I want to be your friend and I love you." And I remember in my head, I don't want to disrespect God. So I started learning about proper nouns and just, pronouns. So I assume God is a person. So the name needs to be, the G needs to be capitalized. That's my experience before Christianity. Like, I would ask my mother questions all the time. Mom, how big is God? How wide is God? How tall is God?
So were you raised in church? Had you?
My parents were not Christian.
So where were you getting the idea of God from?
I got the idea from myself.
Okay.
I remember seeing, growing up in school, there were kids who were special needs. And I remember just feeling the grief, or just the empathy for them. Like, man, I wish I had some power to do something so that they can go play on the playground with me, and they could, these are the things that were going on in my head. I remember seeing homeless people, addicts. I grew up in Miami, Florida, so you just kind of get you get to experience the world, and this was in the 80s when the drugs was real bad. Cocaine was. But anyway, there was a lot of shooting, killing.
Wait, where'd you say you were at?
Miami.
Okay.
Yeah, this was in the 80s. I'm an 80s baby. So a lot was going on in Miami at the time with the pumping of drugs in communities. And, so I just had this idea in my head that, there's gotta be a being who can help, who can assist. And I remember crying to this God, saying, "God, please give me some strength, give me some power, give me some."
So let's put a magnifying glass on that, because that's powerful in and of itself, which I think we'll come back to. But you still used the term God, God. So you had to have
Yeah.
gotten it. Where do you think you got just the word from? Because
So
you
my
got the
parents were,
concept.
yeah,
Yeah, you got the concept of a powerful being, but you called it God. So yeah, how'd you make that
m-
connection?
my parents did not pray. My parents were drinking, smoking. They were
Mm,
doing what young adults were doing.
okay.
So we did not have conversations about God. If there was a
Mm,
conversation about God, I was sparked. That conversation was initiated by me,
mm,
not by my parents.
okay.
So to be honest with you, I can't say that I was exposed to church because we were
Mm-hmm.
not going to church. The only
Mm,
thing we would do for Easter was
mm-hmm.
dress up. My
Mm.
grandmother would always buy us Easter baskets, and we would literally go and look for eggs in her backyard. But we never went to church. So
So
I
so
wish I could
God was
tell
just
you.
in the atmosphere. Somehow you grabbed it and said, that must be
I just
this thing that I'm thinking
conceptualized
of.
in my head that
Wow.
there is a God.
Mm.
But it,
Okay.
and as of course, I'm older
Mm,
now, it's just an imagination
mm,
that I just imagine that. I don't know if
mm.
it's from watching
Right.
superheroes, thinking that somehow
Mm.
there's a God like this superhero.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no exposure to Christianity
Right.
whatsoever.
Okay.
But I can tell you this,
Mm,
I'll never forget the day I was at my auntie's house and I saw Jesus of Nazareth.
mm,
Because they would play those specials like during the time of year, like
mm-hmm. Easter,
yeah, Easter, they had the
Christmas.
Moses thing,
Mm-hmm.
Cleopatra and
Mm-hmm.
those things. I remember seeing Jesus of Nazareth when I was young. But I had already conceptualized in my head that there was a God.
Mm-hmm.
But now I started to relate that, oh, this
Mm,
guy is the one who's here
mm.
to save all of us, like from
Okay.
this,
Wow.
the genetic
Yeah,
diseases. And
yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
is this Jesus guy? Right. And so, and again, my parents were not going to church, but I had
Mm,
already conceptualized in my little head that
mm-hmm.
there's some big being who can maybe empower me or
Right.
somebody to go and help the suffering and the needy.
Mm,
And
mm,
then I
mm.
see this image of Jesus on TV, the hazel-eyed, skinny, frail white guy that's just kind of touching folks and
Healing
doing these
people.
healing people. I'm like, okay, God, and I said, I want to be on his team.
Okay.
But of course,
Wow.
my parents didn't,
Mm,
they weren't saved or born again. So
mm,
in my head, I was now on Jesus's team. I just need to meet this guy
mm.
that was on the
Wow.
TV screen. So it was a unique situation. It was a unique situation, man. So
Okay. So how did it come to, so you're making this up as you go along
hmm
and finding vocabulary for it from quote unquote God knows where.
hmm
You the name or term God is somewhere in the zeitgeist. You grab that. That's this concept I'm thinking of. You see a Jesus on TV. Oh, he's that figure. You're putting it all together. At what point do you come to realize, oh, there's a whole religion that's got this all codified already? I'm one of them. How does it
There
how
you
does how
go.
does it click?
Good question. So let me clarify some things.
Mm-hmm.
Although my parents were not going to church at all, they were moral.
Okay.
Like it's two things my mama preached to me as a non-believing Christian.
Mm,
It's two things I hate: a liar and a
mm,
thief. And you bet
okay.
not be one of them. If I ask you something, boy, you better tell me the truth, or you know what's gonna happen.
Mm.
And my daddy was the same way. If don't lie to me, don't lie to nobody. And you better respect your teachers, respect your neighbors.
Mm,
And so the idea of morality
mm-hmm.
was already,
Yeah.
being taught by my parents.
Okay.
So, but and so, which leads to the conversation. It's not necessarily I would say in the zeitgeist that God was just kind of out there.
Mm,
People were still talking about God. They may
mm.
not have been religious in
Got you.
their practice, but you hear the term God. I think in a Western culture like this, you're going to
Yep.
hear God
Yep.
come up. So
God
I can
bless
see,
you.
yeah, yeah, God bless. So
You know what I
I
mean?
would, I would adopt that idea that
Mm,
there is a God without the indoctrination of Christianity. It's
got
just,
you. Okay.
even there were times when my parents may have prayed,
Mm,
but it wasn't like with a Christian base. It was just,
right.
it's something you do,
Did you guys say grace around the table for your food or you?
um, no, but my parents did teach me that when you eat, you need to bless your food.
Interesting.
So that kind of thing, it's the same thing with Easter, man. It was
Okay.
weird. We would dress up for Easter, but we
And
never went to church to do some kind of observation, and we would take
wow.
pictures. My grandma,
Right.
y'all dress up with Sunday best, but we never went to church. It was weird. It was just a weird
Okay.
tradition. Yeah.
All right. So then how does it click to the religion for you then?
So my parents,
Mm,
I watched them convert. after their divorce.
Wow.
So my mom went her way, my dad went his way. And so I was going back and forth to spending time with both of them. My dad was a heavy smoker. I remember him drinking Heineken. That was his favorite beer. And then suddenly he goes to church and he stops drinking, he stops smoking, and he's a different person. Not so much in character, but just certain things that he would do, he stopped doing. Because my father to me was, he wasn't a perfect man. I mean, the divorce was because of infidelity and things of that nature, but he did change to some degree, or I say a significant degree for me, and likewise with my mother. So my father attended a holiness church, and my mother attended a holiness church.
Two different churches.
Two different churches. Yeah, two different churches. Because they're divorced by this time.
Right.
So we're just, we're visiting both parents. Like I have two other siblings, but we're going back and forth between both parents as far as spending time with them. And I've seen them change, both of them change under the banner of, the holiness movement or churches.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I'm hearing for the first time about Jesus, the guy seen on TV. And I don't know if you know anything about holiness churches, but the Jesus I saw on TV was not the Jesus in the holiness church. It's more like you need to confess your sins or you're going to die and go to hell. The same Jesus that died on the cross. If you reject his sacrifice on that cross, there's some punishment to be paid, but that didn't deter me because I just felt like, hey, I want to be on this team. So when they did the altar call, I do remember going up there and accepting
About how
Jesus
old
as
were you?
So preteen, so I'd be about 11.
Okay.
When I officially went up there, but between, let's say, 7 and 11, I was always looking to get on the team anyway. So my parents joining the church just helped me join Jesus' team.
And you saw him change appearance.
And I saw them
from what you're saying, right?
Yeah, I saw change in my parents.
So you joined the team. What was it now? So that was at around age 11. There's some people that have the experience, like I had the experience. I responded to an altar call at 12, but it didn't really click for me until around 16, where I understood the gospel, and I felt like now I'm really saved. Like now I get it. Was it a steady progression for you from 11 on, or was there another point in time where you felt like now you really had the come to Jesus moment, or was 11 it for you?
11 would have been it for me.
Okay.
Because from that point, I was different than my siblings, right? I stuck out as the square guy.
What were some of the differences?
Oh man, I was speaking in tongues. I was remembering Bible verses by heart. I'd be good. I did some weird things. I went up in my mother's attic. I won't forget this. In the attic, up in the roof of the house, with a candle, surrounded by insulation. Now, mind you, one drop of the candle,
I'm about to bring the house down.
I'm gonna bring the whole house down. And under candlelight, I'm reading the Bible.
Why?
I was that weird. I was that weird kid.
Why? What moved you to do that?
Because, it made me, I wanted to isolate myself with God. And when you're living with other siblings, you got a busy house, I thought to myself, man, I need to get away from this and devote myself to get on.
So there's no light in the attic, so that you bought the candle for the light.
If it was a light, I didn't know.
Okay.
I just said, well, it's dark up here. I need to see. Just light this candle, and and I'll read under candlelight the word of God. Yeah, man, I was weird. I was weird like that.
No, but see, that's the thing. That's not weird. It's devotion. You like this dedication.
Exactly. It was devotion.
You know what I mean? You believed this thing, and you was all for it. Like, I want the person who's watching, who's trying to discredit, like trying to take away, oh, see, he wasn't saved because of this, wasn't saved because of that. I always say when these kind of stories are told, look at what this brother was going through to get to know God. So if it turns out that he wasn't saved, as you probably want to say, he was reaching out. Where was God's reaching back out if he wasn't saved all this time? But just factor that into whatever you're going to say about Chris's testimony. So, okay. So you're seeking God. You're in the attic with a candle, about to burn the house down.
About to burn the house down.
That's age 11 onward. You remained a Christian for how many years?
Until I deconverted 3 years ago.
So you're talking about what, 30 years?
Hmm. Oh yeah, 30 years easily. Over 30 years actually.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So 11, yeah, close to 40 years.
So let me just break it down some more. When
Yeah.
I tell you I was seeking God,
Okay.
I was fasting as a child,
Mm,
like for 3 days, and some days no water. Like I'm
mm,
like, I want to know God. I would go off in the woods. Now,
mm,
you know, shortly after my parents' divorce, my mother moved to Georgia. So it was a new experience for me
mm,
because I was always into, animals and things of that nature. So when I saw as many pine trees and
mm,
gum trees and hardwoods and Georgia, oh man, that was
mm.
heaven for me.
Okay.
So that gave me an opportunity to go off in the woods
Mm,
and again pray and just do these things that I thought
mm,
would get me closer to God, that would
mm.
get me. And it wasn't that I was preparing for anything per se,
Right.
like I'm about to be this great faith healer, or it was
Mm,
just I wanted to be close to God.
mm.
My sisters knew this about this has been my life since I've been a child.
Okay.
So to deconvert,
Mm,
I know we were talking, I was messaging back and forth with you. This would be
mm.
earth shattering for
Yeah.
my family because like out of
Mm.
all, I remember you as a child. I
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
if there was anybody walking with God, it was you. So
So
just
let's do this because I still want to I want people to see just how in you were. So you talk about all the things that you were doing to seek for God. What were some of the things that you would have pointed to where, okay, you were doing this, but God was also like, what did you give God credit for doing in terms of reaching back out to you during that time? Like, did you hear God speaking to you? Did you
absolutely.
see or maybe even do miracles or that kind of like what was your
Yeah, so
spiritual life
I'm
like?
glad you asked that question. Good
Yeah.
question. So my progression in Christianity, it went from the spiritual part of it,
Mm,
the supernatural aspects of it, which was important to me
mm,
because for me that was the only way that I could authenticate Christianity, like
mm,
really present it as evidence.
mm,
So speaking in tongues, prophesying,
mm,
having visions,
mm.
the book of Acts, right?
Okay.
That third chapter when you start talking about the spirit and
Mm-hmm.
how the church was quote unquote birthed
Mm.
because Jesus promised to give you dunamis power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. If that didn't happen, then
Mm.
I was out. I
Wow.
couldn't imagine Christianity being anything other than what is literally saying in that
Right.
book.
It can't be
So
less than that for you.
it would be less than that for me
Mm,
because I'm banking everything on this.
mm,
So, of course, now that I'm older, I realize now that a lot of it was self-induced
mm.
because I really wanted what I
Right.
read to be a reality. Therefore, I bought into it
Yeah.
with the environment, the atmosphere, and the emotionalism of it all.
Mm.
I was hook, line, and sinker. Bought it all.
Now, did you have the experience? I know some people have this, some people don't, where they go through different, not even just denominations, but they go through different understandings of Christianity. So like for me, I grew up in a kind of church where you were speaking in tongues, prophesying, all that. Then at some point, I realized I don't think that this is for today. So I stopped being such a charismatic Christian and became a more, some people probably hate this dichotomy that I make here, but what I thought was more biblically based in terms of do you have to speak in tongues,
Mhm.
and more fruit of the spirit than gifts of the spirit. That were you always in that vein of Christianity, or did you go through different phases of denominations? Is a poor
Good
choice of
question.
word,
No,
but
that
yeah.
no, I got you because
Mhm.
my story kind of follows or patterns yours in many
Okay.
ways. So yeah, the charismatic movement was my introduction. I'll say the holiness movement
Hmm.
because sometimes people use
Yeah.
those
Yep.
terms interchangeably, but they're not always the same. And I don't want to
True.
break down the many
True. Yep.
denominations and slices of the pie of Christianity, but
Hmm.
the holiness movement was more about like the kind of movement I came up in. Women couldn't wear pants.
Hmm.
I was a part of my high school swim team, and my church looked at me crazy because I was in Speedo. So it was like,
Wow.
know if you could do the Speedo thing. It's all you. It was just it was that extreme, you know. Divorce was a no-go in holiness movements. You couldn't look on women, and you know, women, you know, would fall out. They would put covers on them to make sure you couldn't look under their dress. Just the weirdest thing. But anyway, so yeah, that was a holiness movement. And then from the holiness movement, I then went to the charismatic movement because I wanted more fruits or gifts of the Spirit. Now, the fruits of the Spirit was equally important, but you got to have both because the Bible talks about both of them, right?
Yeah.
And then from there, you know, my experience with the Black church went left. And listen, and I don't want to downplay.
I got you.
I don't want to downplay in my interview here.
Mm.
In other words, I don't want to say any Black pastor represents the Black church, and therefore all Black churches are just.
Yeah.
But my experience in the Black church, meaning a predominantly Black congregation, where the leader is a Black male or female, it went south because for me because the more I was reading the Bible, the more I was anticipating hearing more about Jesus and not so much about suffering, prosperity, and you know, the enemy's coming against your finances, the enemy coming against this, and now you got a miracle check in the mail, and you know, just the it was just so weak theologically, right? You know, that I just couldn't stomach that anymore. And you know, then I started to question things about, you know, the Holy Spirit and being filled with it, with the evidence of speaking in tongues, because I saw so many people struggle with that and how they lost confidence in their faith
Wow.
in Jesus because they wasn't speaking in tongues like everybody else. And so it was with dealing with young people, particularly college students, they're already fragile in their, you know, understanding of things when it comes to Christianity. So
Yeah.
adding that piece to it, like you still ain't part of the club yet because you haven't spoken in tongues. I had to abandon that.
Okay.
But by this
So,
time, you know, I'm in my young 20s. I've gone off to college. My high
okay.
school years, just to be straight up with that, it was just that's that Jesus Bible toting dude. So I didn't have many friends in high school.
Did you get put on the cross movement in high school or college, or what stage of life
it was in college.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in college.
Yeah. All right. So go from holiness to charismatic.
Charismatic.
So that's one shift. That's a good way to look at it. I'll just call it a shift. That's one shift. Did you remain in the charismatic, or did you have more shifts?
Yeah, so pretty much a third of my young adult years, I was a minister and an elder, and then an associate pastor in the charismatic church at the local university that I attended. So
Okay.
so when I went off to college, you know, I can say my first year, I was because I had no connections with anyone because this school was, you know, hour plus so from my home. So I had no base like a church to go to. So at the time, I could say I drifted a little bit. When I say I drifted, meaning I wasn't praying as much. I wasn't, you know, I got exposed to like the college life and the freedom of just going here, going there. And so I can say that it was during that time that I don't want to say backslid, but I was just not into praying and all of those things that I would typically have done in high school and in my grade school years. But it took about a year for me to say, no, this is not me. You know, this is not what I want to do.
Okay.
So that's when I started looking for a church home. And a gentleman that actually went to high school with me, he was at the same campus, and he started asking questions about being a Christian. And so that led me to go, man, I have a responsibility to help
Right.
to help my friend, you know,
Yeah.
my classmate find Jesus. So that really led me to then go and find a church home. And of course, I looked for a church home that was that I was familiar with as far as the charismatic movement, the speaking in tongues, the running around the church, you know, the organ playing, you know, the hype that's created around that type of environment. So we both end up joining that church and were soon thereafter made, you know, youth leaders, right? Because of the
You're
enthusiasm
young.
that
Yeah.
we were
Yeah.
young, we had the enthusiasm, and you know, so we were being groomed.
Okay.
That's the best way to describe it. We were being groomed to go take the message of Jesus back to the campus that we were, you know, we lived, you know, so, and
Wow.
it grew from there.
Okay. When they put you in ministry, did you feel like I'm not ready for this? Did you feel like this is what I'm made for? Like, what was your mindset?
Oh, I felt ready.
Okay.
Just because of the amount of years that I had
Mm-hmm.
spent leading up to that point, praying, fasting,
Yeah.
reading my Bible, being a part of church. Like I said, I could say my freshman year in college
Mm-hmm.
was that moment where I somewhat deviated, and I
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't even feel good about it. To be,
Right.
didn't I
You
wasn't like,
tasted the
yeah,
world and you
yeah.
realized that
I was like,
that wasn't for
yeah,
you.
no, this
The
wasn't for
prodigal
me.
son is back home.
Yeah, I'm back home. Yeah, I need to just find me a good church
Yeah.
home, and of course,
Mm,
I say of course, but my prayer life was definitely like, Lord, forgive me. Like I
mm,
have
yeah.
strayed from
Mm,
following you as much as I love you.
mm,
Please forgive me.
mm.
So it was a constant. That was I was constantly repenting of
Okay.
that season in my life where I was
Yeah.
just doing things that I normally wouldn't have done
Okay.
at any point.
Mm,
So of my youth. And that's not to say I was perfect, be good. I'm not saying in
yeah.
11, 12, 13, 14, 15, I wasn't, curious about things like sex, or I wasn't
Mm,
peeping and seeing,
mm.
HBO was, a new thing. So I'm not going to say, oh, I was just
Right.
holier than thou,
Mm,
but there was a line, there was a
mm,
line I wasn't going to
mm.
cross,
Yeah.
as far as just doing something that would just disappoint God or
Mm.
Jesus. Yeah.
Okay. So college, you're in ministry. You end up going on another 20 years, basically,
Hmm.
of ministry. Did you ever go with, well, you said you were an associate pastor.
Hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
borderline professional ministry.
Yeah. Oh, I went to seminary for 2 years,
Okay.
but I'll tell you how I don't want to
No,
jump
let's
ahead.
go.
So my college um, experience was one of being a campus minister
Mm,
for the local church.
okay.
So the local church was supporting the ministry,
Mm,
and it grew
mm,
significantly,
mm.
where the college students were now attending the same church that I was attending
Wow.
as the representative minister on the
Mm,
campus. And
mm,
there was a level of arrogance that I had and the
mm,
ministry itself had, because we were
mm,
the ministry, the demographics was predominantly Caucasian.
mm,
So we did encounter other campus ministries, but they were more on the Southern Baptist
mm,
or Reformed
mhm.
type of campus
They didn't have the
ministry.
fire.
They didn't. There you go. They didn't have the Holy Spirit with the
Mm,
evidence of speaking in tongues. They didn't have the gifts
mm,
of the Spirit to see college students really,
mm,
quote unquote, transform and convert.
mm,
So
mm,
it was beef.
mm, mm,
It
mm.
was beef. And when I say beef, it was that theological conflicts,
Yeah.
that was, so we stayed clear to them because we were special. But you
Mm,
know what? They thought the same things about
mhm.
themselves too. So it wasn't just our end, but never. But the point is,
Yeah.
we were bringing a different brand of Christianity the campus of what I would have considered predominantly conservative,
Mhm.
Caucasian. It was a conservative campus where
Mm,
the ministries were conservative,
okay.
and we were bringing, like you said, the fire. We was
Mm,
bringing cross movement on the campus. Like when we
mm,
did our evangelistic
mhm,
outreach, we was playing hip hop, but it was
mm.
Christian hip hop, and it was cross movement, and it was, what I'm saying, it was those guys, Peace 586. It was those.
Right.
So we was trying to bring
Mm,
I guess, a more ethnically diverse
mhm.
approach to
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Okay.
that was for some years,
Mm,
until I was finally ordained as an elder at that
mm.
church. But all the while,
How
I
old were you as an elder when they ordained
I
you?
would have been 28.
Mm,
Actually younger than that. I would have been, because I got married at 28. So I was an elder before I was
okay.
married. So I would have been 26. So about
Mm,
2 years into my marriage.
okay.
Hmm.
Wow. Got married, had kids?
At 4.
Okay. And how integral to your marriage was your faith?
Oh, everything.
Okay.
Like my wife married me because
Okay.
of who I
That's what I was
was
going to get
as a
after.
leader in the community, as
Okay.
a leader in my church.
Mm,
That was, if you will, a selling point for my me
okay.
being a a viable
And
partner
was
for her.
her faith a selling point for you as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Because
Wow.
she could sing,
Mm-hmm.
so she was an integral part of the ministry, my campus ministry that I was overseeing, because she sung, she led the
Mm.
praise team. I mean,
Wow.
we had musicians on the
Mm-hmm.
campus. We had
Mm.
student body representing the campus ministry, because you couldn't function on the campus without
Mm.
student leadership. So, as I graduated and continued the ministry, we would just, use the students who were part of the ministry to be the presidents and the treasurer, while I just, preached the word of God and,
Mm.
evangelized the campus.
So you're an elder at the church. You marry in the faith. You have
Mhm.
children in the faith. Your children are in their mid to late teens now.
Oh yeah. I mean, my oldest son,
Mm.
everywhere I went, he went. So as an infant, if I was preaching somewhere, he was there. If I'm interacting with the youth on the campus, he was there. So
So,
oh
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
So
he was
now you raise your kids in the fear and
raised
admonition of
my
the
kid.
Lord.
Yes,
And then 3 years ago, you unbelieve.
yes, sir.
So let's get to that.
Let's get to it. So it
So,
starts with
yeah.
theology.
Mm.
For me, it was all about theology. So while I'm enduring as an elder
Mm-hmm.
in the charismatic church, I'm disgusted with the messaging.
Mm.
I'm disgusted with the preaching. It's just
Mm.
like, I don't see Jesus in this.
Mm.
I All I see is a man with a little kingdom, and he's
Mm.
the prophet of God, and he's giving the rhema word, and
Mm.
it's just everything's coming out of his mouth is from God as a prophetic,
Mm.
utterance. And I was like, this is not how, church should be governed. I mean, I had come to the conclusion I was a part of a cult, and I no longer
Mm.
wanted to be a part of that occultic type of
Wow. So hold on. There's a lot.
movement.
There's a lot there.
Mhm.
A minute ago, you said you came for the signs. Like you said, if your Christian experience didn't match what you saw in the book of Acts, something was off.
Yes.
But at this stage of your life, you're getting quote unquote book of Acts stuff. God
Hmm.
speaking through this prophet or whatever, and
Yep.
you're speaking in tongues and all that. But at some point, theology begins to
Becomes
matter.
very important. It becomes very
Mm.
important to me,
Mm.
because I always consider myself a student of the Bible.
Gotcha.
So, what I began to do is I began to read the Old Testament, as they
Mm.
call it,
Mm.
in Christian language, the Old Testament. I just
Mm.
call it the Tanakh, or
The
the Jewish
Hebrew
writings.
Bible. Yeah.
Yeah, the Hebrew
Mm-hmm.
Bible. So I'm reading this, and I'm like, okay, we got to line it all up together. I need to
Mm.
see the continuity. And
Mm.
because, again, I won't say all black church, but because the pastor himself was not delving into the
Yeah.
theology of what was being communicated through the scriptures,
Mm-hmm.
I began to just get disgusted with all of this rhema talk, all of this
Mm.
prophetic talk, all of this, you know, it just was not resonating anymore with me.
Do you share that
Um,
with your wife?
oh yeah,
How does she respond?
she was there when I left that church. We left together.
Okay.
So
You say you
I
start feeling like you're in a cult. She was like, I kind of get it.
Yeah, because I was
Okay.
telling, okay, so I was doing something that maybe I should not have done.
Mm.
I was having conversations with her about the elders meetings we were having. And those conversations were supposed to be amongst the elders.
Mm.
But when you're behind the scenes
Yeah.
of a church in a ministry, you get the real, right? You get the
Mm.
raw. And
Mm.
I was just hearing things that just didn't line up with the scriptures.
Mm.
So I told my wife, I said, it's time for us to leave the church, and I'm going. And now, mind you,
Mm.
this is over 15 years.
Mm.
So I've got friends, close friends, ministry
Yeah.
partners that was working with me in the ministry on
Mm.
campus, that they went on to be associate pastors at
Mm.
other, because I don't know if you know about the
Mm.
franchising of churches, but that's a big deal
Yeah.
when you're wanting to be a mega church. You want to
Yeah.
franchise the church. So you send out
Yeah.
these ministers and elders that you've ordained, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't want to sit up under you forever and
Yeah.
not go make their money or start their
Satellite
own little
churches.
kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They want to start their own little Kentucky Fried Chicken. So or whatever franchise. But so at that point I knew my time was next,
Mm.
because the pastor told me, here's your package. This is what you'll receive as a pastor if you
Mm.
move on and start a church in this location, this part of the city. And me and my wife respectfully declined the offer.
Mm.
I was like, no, that's not what I want to do.
Mm.
So by this time, YouTube was accessible,
Okay.
and I started getting exposed to
Mm.
gentlemen like John Piper,
Okay.
basically
Mm.
Calvinists.
Yeah.
Calvinists. So that is what began to appeal to my
Mm.
theology, is that I
Okay.
wanted to know about
Yeah.
what Paul was saying in Ephesus about predestination, and
Mm.
why is he mentioning these things, and
Mm.
why are these things not spoken of in the
Yeah.
charismatic movement. So those things, grace, being saved by grace,
Mhm.
through faith. Yeah, that's not always how that works, in the
Mm.
charismatic movement. Sometimes it's
Right.
works, not necessarily resting and residing in the idea
Mm.
of being satisfied with Christ alone,
Mm.
faith alone in Christ alone. So these ideas
Mm.
began to just
The
spark
simplicity
my
of the
interest.
gospel, as they say.
And I will say this,
Mm.
it's Paul's gospel, because there's plenty of
Mhm.
gospels from my reading
Right.
in the New Testament.
Right.
I've heard it, but I'll say Paul's gospel,
Mm.
which most conservative,
Yeah.
you know, Caucasian,
Mm.
Calvinists would say the gospel is really Paul's gospel,
Mhm.
because there were other gospels.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll
Yep.
maybe delve into that. But yeah, so that's when I left the church, having no idea where I was going to go next.
Mm. Okay.
So I left.
I'm just curious, did you have any desire, even though you declined their offer to go plant a church under them, did you have a desire to church plant or to pastor at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the answer to that is yes, I
Okay.
did, but I did not want to recreate what I came from.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to present another brand of Christianity
Mm-hmm.
according to the gospel, I
Mm-hmm.
felt like I needed someone to now mentor me
Mm.
in something that I'm learning
Yeah.
as a Christian,
Yeah.
as a Christian minister.
Yeah.
So how that worked, and this is a good way to segue. So I had a good friend
Mm.
who was a part of, he was in the army, but
Mm.
he's also in college. So he was using his GI Bill, to
Mm.
attend. So he said, I have a chaplain that I want you to meet. So the chaplain was in Tennessee, but it wasn't far.
Mm.
Nashville is not far from Atlanta, so it was maybe about 2.5, 3 hour
Mm.
drive. But I was able to go and meet this pastor.
Mm.
He was a pastor and a chaplain for the army, and he introduced me to
Mm.
Calvinism, and what all that meant. So
Mm.
he became a contact
Okay.
for learning. And then he hooked me up with a local pastor in
Mm.
Atlanta who was a
Mm.
part of the Presbyterian Church PCA.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how my family ended up going
Yeah.
to, the PCA church,
Mm.
which is, a Calvinist church.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I started learning their
Mm-hmm.
way of doing things as far
Now,
as
there was probably culture shock there for your
absolutely,
family. How did your
absolutely.
family and you?
Hmm.
Because I'm sure for you, I'm going to take a stab here. I'm sure for you, it was worth the trade to lose a little bit of the cultural affinity to get the theological astuteness that you wanted.
Absolutely.
But how was it for your family making that trade?
Well, I will say this. I should say, growing up in Florida,
Mm.
I was exposed to a lot of, it was really, when you say mix,
Mm-hmm.
my neighborhood was mixed. Like I
Okay.
had white friends, I had Latino friends, I had Jamaican friends, Haitian friends. I mean, literally,
Mm-hmm.
the community was mixed. So
Mm-hmm.
as far as, let's just put it this way, I was able to relate to people irregardless of the cultural differences.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my career also helped me with that as well.
Okay.
And well, you don't know this, but my kids, the schools that they attended was also
Mm-hmm.
in communities that was somewhat diverse,
Okay.
or well, it was diverse enough where they got exposure
Okay.
to all types of cultures. So to attend a predominantly white church
Mm-hmm.
was, it wasn't as weird as it could have been,
Okay.
because of the exposure that I had in my career,
Mm-hmm.
and just the type of people the type of people that I was interacting with from their backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't as awkward.
Gotcha.
And I don't know if you know about conservative churches, or Calvinist churches, but they believe in homeschooling. A lot of them
Mm-hmm.
believe in the homeschooling concept, and a lot of the families would adopt
Mm.
children
Mm.
of other ethnicities,
Mm.
whether they're from Africa or
Mm.
from Honduras, or they would just, I don't know
Mm.
what caused that type of
Mm.
movement, but it was their way of, spreading the gospel by
Right.
adopting kids who were from different cultures and less,
Mm.
less privileged areas of the
Mm.
world. So yeah, that's what I noticed when I joined or became a
Okay.
part of church was there were a couple of African Americans there, but not many. And
Mm.
if you was there as an African American, it's because you believed in that doctrine. You
Mm.
believed or wanted to know
Yeah.
more in fellowship with that type of
Okay.
understanding.
Okay. Around what year did you guys go to the PCA church?
So we married at 28, so it had to be less, maybe a year. It was because we'd married in a year, maybe I
Okay.
wouldn't even say no more than 2 years. We were out of the church.
So then most of your marriage and most of the last, what, 10, 15
10
years,
years.
you were at that church or that kind of church.
I was at that type of church.
Okay. So then how does it begin to fall apart for you then? Because, I wonder if anybody would hear this and think, oh, you're just like, I don't think somebody could say, oh, you're just church hopping. You're just like, you were seeking God. You were seeking to be taught well. You were seeking to have the spiritual experience that was meaningful and like the book of Acts, but
Hmm.
also to know what the Bible says and why it says it. So
Exactly.
that doesn't seem like a church hopper. It doesn't seem like somebody who's, oh, I'm just dissatisfied. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Oh yeah, that was not the case for
Right.
me. We're talking over 30 years
Mm.
as a Christian, so I can say a third of that time was spent in the charismatic, holiness movement.
Mm.
Then the other third would have been with the Presbyterian PCA. Then
Mm.
the last leg would have been with a um a Reformed Baptist church.
Okay.
That was my last stop. And
Okay.
from there, is no turning back. So I went through this
No,
evolution, if you will.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And I
You
was
got
gonna
a
say no
question.
turning back until you turned away.
Right. I mean, no turning back. I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
going back to either of those,
right,
branches of
right.
Christianity because, it's all fantasy. It's
Mm,
all mythology.
yeah.
As far as I'm concerned. But I'll go back to the PCA. So it was there at, my time with the PCA church
Mm,
that I was introduced to seminary.
okay.
So the church was willing to pay for a third of the tuition. I
Mm,
would have a scholarship with the Reformed Theological Seminary.
mm,
They would do a third, and I would do the third. And that was
mm,
perfect for me.
mm,
But it's when I went to seminary is
mm.
that I learned about things that were not being discussed or taught or
Wow.
preached about
Hmm.
that it just blew my mind.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, so this whole midrash thing, how the disciples were adopting
Yeah.
this hermeneutics or this tool of Jewish rabbis to
Mm,
come up with fitting prophecy to
mm,
Jesus. And covenant theology, I was okay with.
mm,
Okay. I had no problem
mm,
with covenant theology.
mm,
But when they started to explain to me, and I
mm,
never forget it because I was reading the book,
mm,
I was like, well, wait a minute. So,
mm.
Paul, the anonymous writers of the Gospels, they were all just using this.
Now, when it was taught to you, was it taught that they were doing midrash, or was it taught that? Because here's what happened. I don't know what book you were reading, but one of my professors wrote. You may have read his book. Greg Bill is the one who wrote the book. He was one of my professors. Um,
I still have the book, so I'll have to go and check.
okay,
I won't do it now during the
so
interview.
he wrote a book on how the New Testament authors use the Old Testament, and his argument was basically um, they were not simply doing midrash. They were not simply taking it and finagling it to make it fit, but
Mhm.
rather the Holy Spirit allowed them to do things with the Old Testament that we cannot do. So like it would
Okay.
be
Mhm.
eisegesis if we did it. For
Right.
them,
Right.
it was Holy Spirit driven.
Yeah. So I read between the lines. So
Okay.
yeah, it was not said the way that I'm just, I am pronouncing,
Okay.
but I read between the lines and said these guys are doing what
Okay. So
every what the
let's make it plain then.
okay.
So they were trying to teach you that this is what the Jews did, but this is
Mm-hmm.
not what the New Testament authors were doing. They were doing something spiritual and special.
Well, I'll say this: the
Mhm.
fact that I was actually introduced to the concept,
Got you. You saw it.
I saw it. There was no need. I mean, you don't
Yep.
let the cat out the bag and then tell me that's not a cat. That's out the bag. I'm just that guy. I can't do it.
That
So if
was,
you're, yeah, go ahead.
bro, that was my experience.
Yeah.
Greg Bill, he was sitting in class telling us what midrash was,
Mm-hmm.
but then that this is not what you see in the New Testament. And I'm like, well, what's the difference?
And there was another term. It's the midrash, and it's a P word that I can't think of it right now. And I
Pesher.
want. There you go. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm reading the terms, like how you define what these quote unquote Jewish rabbis did, and
Yep.
how Christian contemporaries essentially did the same thing. And you can't convince me now that, oh, that really wasn't. So again, while I may be articulating
Mm.
my conclusion,
Mm-hmm.
while they may not have said that they're doing
Mm.
it was very clear to me, even from the writings of the New Testament,
Wow.
after careful study, that this is what you're doing. This is
So wait,
exactly
so
what
then
you're
how
doing.
does that hit you then? If you're sitting in seminary saying, wait, the authors of my Bible are doing the thing that, how did it hit you? Like,
I
what
was
did it do
angry.
for you? Okay.
Oh, I was angry.
Hmm.
I was
Even though they're
angry
still trying to justify it as the word of
even though
God.
I felt lied to.
Mm,
Like
mm,
all my
mm,
years, matriculating through Christianity, I felt lied to.
mm.
And when I tell you it burnt me up, it
Shh.
it set me on fire.
Wow.
And
Mm.
again, the reason why I didn't premeditate or just think about what I was going to say in this interview, because I know that if I prepare myself well enough, that I could just come out with all guns a blazing and just shoot it down. But that's not what I want to
Mm.
do. I just want to
Yeah.
express the deep level of
Mm-hmm.
disgust
Mm.
that I felt once I was again behind the scenes, once I
Yes.
was in the classroom writing reports and
Yep.
extracting these sources,
Mm, mm,
reading
mm,
these sources, and I'm like,
mm.
are you a Christian? I mean, like, you're like, yeah, Christian. I'm like, this is weird.
Mm.
Like, how does this happen?
You're
Where
seeing how
you,
the sausage is made.
yes. Oh man. I was really angry at that
Mm.
time. A
Okay.
lot of it I was able to bottle it in, but I can tell
Mm-hmm.
you what kind of took me over the top is when I
Well, hold on,
began
wait
to.
up.
Oh,
Let's
okay,
let's
go ahead.
slow let's slow
Mhm.
roast this.
Yes, okay.
As you're feeling angry, you're realizing that it's not what you thought. It's a little different. Do you share any of this with your wife?
No,
With anybody?
no,
Okay.
no.
And
It's
why
for
not?
that's a good question.
Yeah.
So one, I was still intimidated
Mm.
by the intellectualism
Wow.
of and I'm gonna be very honest and candid. I was
Mm-hmm.
intimidated by the intellectualism of my counterpart.
Mm.
I'm a black man in a
Mm.
predominantly white church, and these men are
Mm.
revered as
Mm-hmm.
intellectuals. Like, if anybody knows the right way about Christianity, these guys do, and I don't.
Mm. Mm.
So
Mm.
I better shut my mouth and learn from these guys.
Yeah.
Because if I want
Yeah.
to truly be saved, and I want to be better than the folks that I left, I need to hang in here and just
Mm.
learn more.
Mm.
Although I'm
Mm.
still
Mm.
just in the
Yes.
inside, I'm just kind of angry, like, man, like, how do we justify this?
Mm. I'm so
And
glad
I
you're
couldn't
saying
tell my
this.
wife because my wife is,
Mm.
the best way to read. I'm gonna say this, and no disrespect for her. And she saw that she wouldn't feel like I'm disrespecting her.
Mm.
But my wife was the type of person, I believe it, and I don't need to know anymore. I just need to believe, and I'm good
Mm.
with that. I don't want to
Yeah.
get into the weeds of
Mm-hmm.
theology and start.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. That's what you wanted to do. You're going to be the pastor, so you go do
Mm-hmm.
that. But
Right.
I'm just going to support you and
Right.
support the kids,
Right.
and you handle all that.
Mm.
So that I knew it would have been kind of like a waste of my time to have that conversation with her
Mm.
at that time,
Right.
because she just wants to flow with
Mm.
me.
Mm. Mm. Now, did any part of you think this is dangerous for my faith?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Very dangerous because
Mm.
now I'm not going to stop believing in God, but
Mm. Mm.
it's creating a conflict
Mm.
in me where I don't know what to do moving forward other than let's just keep learning. Let's just
Okay.
hear
Okay.
what they're saying. Let's revisit the Old Testament. That's what it made me do.
Okay.
It made me revisit the Hebrew writings. And the more I read the Hebrew writings, the more I really began to question the New Testament. Because I was trained in my head, the New Testament informs the Old, not the other way around. But then I began to realize that this revelation of Jesus is supposed to be founded on the revelations of the Old.
You know the saying, the Old Testament is the New Testament concealed. The New Testament is the Old Testament revealed.
Right. And as I began to learn more, that's when debate started to arise. And I was like, no, I don't agree with that. Like
Wow.
the Hebrew writers began to be I took what was said in the Hebrews writing at face value. Period. I'm not going to add anything. I'm
So
not
the
going to look.
idea of progressive revelation didn't save it for you?
Nope.
Wow.
I needed continuity.
Yeah.
And I didn't see the continuity. And when I didn't see the continuity, I started questioning the New Testament writings more than I did the Old. Now, once I started really going off on the deep end, I just knew Adam and Eve wasn't real. And those things just started unraveling. But it took me, the journey took me first to look at what was written at face value.
Yeah.
And not seeing Jesus in it, not making Jesus in it, not
what
doing
were they
all these
saying?
things.
What were they doing
Right.
before the New Testament got to it?
Yes.
I remember I had an experience where I got offended at the New Testament because I said I had to put progressive revelation and all that kind of stuff on hold because that was the trick I was using to make sense of it all. Oh, well, they just didn't know. I think even Peter says something like that. They didn't know that they were writing for you.
Right.
But I said, no, that's starting to sound like cap. Let me just, and I got offended at the New Testament authors because here's what I remember sitting there saying. I was in the library at Westminster and I said to myself, or to the New Testament writers, what gives y'all the right to tell these people what they meant? When I read the Old Testament, they're not saying any of the things that you're saying they were saying. What gives you the right to say that? And I remember specifically looking at Paul. You talked about Paul's gospel, looking at Paul's justification by faith and going back to Genesis 15. And when I saw, I've held this in for over 10 years.
Oh yeah, I was holding it too.
But when I saw he believed God and he counted it to him as righteousness. When I saw that he counted it to him as righteousness, didn't really make sense for God to be counting Abraham's faith as righteousness. It made much more sense for Abraham to be counting God as righteous for keeping his promise.
There you go.
When I saw that, and I said, then Paul is just he's doing this Pesha thing. He's doing this midrash thing. He's taking something that never meant that and making it mean something else. When justification by faith fell apart, I slammed the book shut and I looked up and I said, you got to do something. I looked up to God, like, you got to do something. This is falling apart fast. And I didn't think that thought again for another 5 years, but it happened and I knew it happened.
Yeah, so my story is similar to yours. It was Paul's gospel, and because now it burns me up whenever I hear people go, "But do you know the gospel?" And I have to always correct them. You mean do I know Paul's gospel? Right. I know Paul's gospel because Peter's gospel would have been a little different than Paul's gospel. Peter would probably want you to be circumcised, and he probably wants you to keep the law. By the way, if you was going to follow Peter's gospel or the what they call the circumcision's gospel, there were other gospels out there besides Paul's. But since my arrogant, highly intellectual, Reformed Christians like to think of the gospel, they're really meaning it's Paul's gospel, and because he wrote more prolifically than everyone else, he won, in this Christian battle of what gospel you're going to follow. But I will say this: I was angry, similar to you, because I knew Paul was. After I read his writings, and then I was just taking what the Hebrew writings were saying at face value. The prophecy of the virgin birth in Matthew unraveled, made me mad. The whole genealogy in Matthew and Luke made me mad. I mean, everything just made me, I'm be honest, it
Now,
just burnt me up.
were you going to any other sources to kind of like help you, like maybe even some skeptics or liberal theologians, or?
No, by that time I wasn't really,
Mm,
the skeptic thing, because I would still have considered myself a Christian,
right.
but a Christian who just wanted to know the truth.
Were you
Like in the
asking your professors about any of this? Were they able to address any of it?
I can remember just conversations as a general conversation in classrooms, but
Mm-hmm.
never did I go personally to one professor and say, "Hey, I'm struggling with this. Can you
Okay.
help me?" Because again, I was really new to that
Mm-hmm.
environment.
Mm-hmm.
Because I graduated from college, but to me, seminary is just
Mm-hmm.
it's a different feel.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely from my perspective, it was indoctrinating
Yeah.
me more. So I didn't want to resist indoctrination as much as I wanted to just kind of make sense of it in my own head without giving any sign of, hey, I don't know if,
Right.
I just didn't,
And there's
I
a
was
sense in
intimidated.
which, well, I think
Mhm.
there's the intimidation factor. There's also a sense in which you don't, you have the freedom, but you don't feel the freedom to ask those kind of questions
No,
because you can't afford to appear to be a doubting Christian,
right.
especially one of the few black dudes on campus,
There you go.
and you're questioning
Hmm.
because, and there's so many different motivations that come into play here because this could also, if you do well here, this could be the key to your career.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So you questioning puts you in all kinds of bad light,
It does.
let alone the intimidation factor that you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's not you leading me. That's just what I was experiencing. Like I
Mm-hmm.
really was. And it takes a lot to intimidate me. I'm just being honest because I grew up in, I'm saying I grew in the rough streets, but I mean, I've been exposed to a lot as a person.
Mm-hmm.
My career, I've had, over 12, 15 years in law enforcement. So I've
Okay.
seen a lot of things. It takes a lot to intimidate me.
Mm-hmm.
But being that I wanted so bad to be a part of
Mm-hmm.
that group of intellectuals, you know, and, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it was just hard to really start asking those type of questions,
Gotcha.
seeing that I was so newly introduced to the world that I wanted to be a part of.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you
Um,
bottled it up.
Bottled it up, yep, for a very long time.
Okay.
I'll say about,
Hmm.
yeah, it's been about 5 years. I
Mm.
was just, but what it led me to do is just read more, read more, read more,
Gotcha.
as far as the Bible and
Mm-hmm.
looking at what was written face value. And I just saw so much discontinuity
Mm.
that at that point I was like, I'm done with seminary.
Mm. So you didn't
And
finish
I didn't finish.
because
I did
all the
2 years
discontinuity.
because of all of that.
Wow.
It got to the point where, oh, I could tell you what happened.
Mm.
So there was uh, um, a minister who'd graduated from Reformed Theological Seminary.
Mm.
He was a part of the church, the PCA movement, and he wanted to plant a church
Mm.
in Atlanta. So they asked me to be a part of that church plant
Mm.
to, of course, bring some diversity
As
because
an
the
elder
piece.
or just as one of the key members?
No, no, not as an elder, but
Mm.
just as a key player in
Mm-hmm.
outreach. Because my experience, my experience in ministry,
Mm-hmm.
it really did go far in the PCA because they respected,
Yeah.
the commitment, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm.
respected what knowledge I did have,
Mm-hmm.
that I had kind of gained on my own as far as pointing towards the reform movement or the
Yeah.
reform brand. So they embraced that, and that's why they wanted to educate me more because they saw that. Mhm.
This brings up a question. They saw that. I know they probably didn't look too favorably on the denominations that you had come from.
Oh, absolutely not.
But here's my question. When you began to start having doubts and all that, were you able to draw any comfort from the times in the past that you had seen God move and you spoke in tongues and you had all these? How were you looking back at those experiences now that you became more theologically concerned, but then started having issues with the theology?
Yeah, so I didn't long for those days,
Okay.
because at this point now, I'm not dismissive of, prophecy. I'm not
Mm,
dismissive of the gifts of the Spirit. But for me, I'm now leaning towards this being able to articulate
right.
the gospel
Mm,
and, in a way that in other words, I want to be a better apologist.
Got you.
And I just didn't.
So, but had you discounted those experiences at that point or no?
No, I hadn't discounted them, but to me, those things were not good tools for apologists, for apologetics. I needed to be able to show the intellectual aspects of the Christian faith that I believe was there, that I was kind of not disclosed or wasn't disclosed to.
I'm feeling you. I guess I'm just wondering, like, I wonder in my case, I left all that charismatic stuff when I was a teenager, like in my late teens, 18. By 18, I would think I was out of it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was only in it from 16 to 18. By 18, I kind of left alone. But if I had those experiences in my 20s and 30s and all that, when I began to start questioning the faith, if I hadn't discounted that stuff yet, I would think that I would have tried to draw on it for some kind of comfort. Like, I'm wondering why wasn't there nothing in you that made you say, I know I'm doubting the Bible, but I spoke in tongues. I mean, it's got to be real. Like, none of that ever mattered?
Oh yeah. So yeah, good question. So it wasn't so much that I was doubting Jesus or God. I was just doubting the theology or the approach to how these writers came up with these things. But as far as my faith in God, I was still asking God these questions, like, help me, because I know that you're real, because I feel your spirit, I still feel the unctions at times to speak a word of wisdom, which I did, I never dismissed totally.
Even in the PCA.
PCA, I would, if I had an opportunity, and it was respected to some degree, because it wasn't like I was flashing it all the time. And at times I actually preached in the PCA, right? So I had to just tailor my message in such a way, and that's what made me a unicorn to them, because they can sense the energy of a charismatic guy, but I was still keeping it within the confines of a reformed thinker. So it was I was a unicorn, man. I was a unicorn.
That's gonna be a nugget. I'm gonna have to add that nugget in the promo for this, because that'll help people understand, like, just how much of the game you were playing. And I don't mean playing. I don't mean playing games. I mean doing the things that you have to do to survive in the faith world with all these different distinctions.
Yeah, the best way I can describe it is assimilation. You have to assimilate to the brand that you're in, or the brand that you're seeking to be a part of. So yeah, I had the experience of speaking in tongues and prophesying and laying on of hands. But now I want that and the intellectual component. I want to be an apologist in such a way where if I'm speaking with an intellectual, I can show them the intellectual components of the gospel and why you should believe. And if I encounter a person who's just wanting an encounter with God, or an experience, I can come from that level and say, I've had that experience, so I know he's real. And you could, if you do X, Y, and Z, this will happen to you. I was
I think you stopped the mouths of anyone who at this point would try to take away, this can't be a person who had the experiences that I've had, whether it be on the charismatic side or whether it be on the trying to seek God and understand salvation.
Absolutely. And I wanted to understand the gospel. Like, I wanted to understand the details of it, like terms like, we all have to come to the foot of the cross to really, I was the best way to describe it. I was like the reformed Nazi. I wanted to hear you say certain things that let me know you understood Paul's gospel and you understood it clearly. Because if you didn't understand Paul's gospel, you were not a Christian. I don't care if you spoke in tongues. I don't care if you saw visions. If you don't understand coming at the foot of the cross, we all have to be here. Then I had to question your conversion or your I was that guy.
So Watcher, what are you going to say to that? What can you say to that? So bottled up for 5 years or so. What point does the pressure become too much, and how does that happen?
So yeah, I have an out, right? So I'm now part of this church plant that's going to start in Atlanta, and the pastor and his wife and my wife and I, we're meeting, we're talking. We spent a lot of time together. We've gone to
church planning conference.
There you go. But it was with Ligoniers ministry. I can't think of the gentleman's name, but he just passed not too long ago. It was Legionnaire Ministries, and if anyone's seeing this video, they'll know who I'm talking about when I mention Legionnaire Ministries. But it was in Orlando, so we went to the church plant conference there for some days in Orlando. So we were preparing to do all of this, and so we get back to Georgia, only to find out that there was some infidelity in that marriage, and I won't say who did what because but it was infidelity, and then that just blew the whole church plant up. And I mean, money had been set aside. It was just a lot that the PCA had. I mean, it wasn't just a local PCA. This was because the PCA is really big about church planning. So they have a general fund, that they can draw from the PCA itself. If the pastor's gone through his ordination, he's been reviewed by the elders, and so this was about to go down. But when it exploded, that was my out.
Okay.
That was my opportunity to say, hey, look, it's been nice, but this has been a lot for me and my family, and we just need a break. We just need a break from this. Because I was preparing to make sacrifices, to move or do whatever I needed to do. And so for that to happen, that actually gave me an out.
Okay.
And so from that point, I just no longer attended that church or I just disassociated myself with the PCA, not because of the PCA itself, but that opportunity, the situation gave me an opportunity to kind of get on out of there.
Okay.
Which, then I went, from that point, I was not attending church for maybe a year or two because I was just trying to find somewhere to call home.
Okay. All right. So then you're still trying to figure things out. You're trying to find a church, family in tow, so they're not going to church either.
Nope.
What are they thinking during this time? Like what's happening to their spiritual life?
So we're still reading on Sundays.
Okay.
We're visiting churches.
Gotcha.
So, I'm reading to them. We're praying together as a family. We're visiting churches. And now I'm asking my kids as we visit these churches to analyze the pastor's message. Do you hear Jesus in this? Do you hear Christ? And if they say no, Dad, we don't, then that's not the church for us.
So what were you doing with your seminary questions? Still bottled up at that time? Like, so were you suppressing them? What had you done with those questions that make you say something's not right here?
So the questions, I believe I found the answer to them. Not all, but to some. And those answers led me to say, now I need to find a church that aligns with.
What were the answers? What was it that helped you? That settled you?
So part of the answers would have been, one, that Jesus is he's still Lord, and he's still the way, the truth, and but there's certain things that these New Testament authors have written that I can't substantiate or support.
So then so are you saying, and did you realize it, that you had, see, I don't even know how much it mattered to you before you became part of the PCA, because I'm not sure how much it matters in the charismatic movement, but did you realize at that point that you had downgraded your understanding of the doctrine of inerrancy or inspiration?
Yeah, and that did matter.
Okay.
And that did matter. It mattered even in okay, let me just say it this way. In a charismatic church, inerrancy is not spoken. Certain things like theological or terms that you would get out of academia that they're not going to use, but they still
they mean the
that
same thing.
this
Yeah,
is the word of God.
Right. Okay.
It's no errors in it. That's why we can live by and we prophesy by it. But it became more clear to me what inerrancy and infallibility meant as I came into the Presbyterian movement.
So if you're saying that these New Testament authors, they're saying things that you can't support,
that did question the inerrancy or the infallibility of it. It
okay.
did.
Okay.
And so I started looking at those things like the virgin birth as I can't, but.
So you're a Christian without a fully inspired or trustworthy Bible at that point?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
and I'll say it this way. I was willing to still walk with Jesus and just, not rationalize, but just kind of go, okay, man, this is Jesus, you weren't born of a virgin. Okay. This can't be supported.
So you're
Um,
talking back to the text.
I'm talking back, but I'm saying, but you have to be blood lineage from David
Mm,
because God made that promise in Samuel
mm,
to David. And if they're calling you Jesus, son of David, then
mm,
obviously the audience, your Jewish audience in those who believed on you,
mm,
knew that you were a descendant of David.
mm,
So I'm going to dismiss Matthew's virgin birth narrative,
mm,
but I'm not going to dismiss
mm,
you being of the blood lineage of David,
mm.
simply because God made a promise to David, and God made a promise to bring forth a Messiah that would govern Israel.
So you're undoing Matthew's virgin birth story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you also said that in seminary, you also had kind of undone something with Adam and Eve.
Well,
Or
the
did that
the
come later?
undoing of Adam and Eve was after seminary,
Right. Okay.
because now, so my leaning is now towards the Old Testament,
Mm,
and really reading these things, reading what's being said at
mm,
face value,
mm,
and not allowing the voices of my pastors and the professors
mm,
tell me to read Christ into these things and do
mm,
X, Y, and Z. So now I'm thinking, I'm reading. I'm reading
mm,
about Adam and Eve, and now I'm starting to question. You know how you said similar that you were questioning the New Testament writers, like, what gave you
mm,
the authority to do this?
mm.
I had already dismissed some of the things that they had said, and now I'm just like, man, I'm just gonna be reading
Okay.
this Hebrew scripture, and I'm gonna rediscover my faith
Mm,
by reading the
mm,
Hebrew scriptures. It only kind of made things a little more complicated as I began to question
right.
Adam and Eve, and like, okay,
Mm,
so
mm,
Adam and Eve, how real were they?
mm. And it wasn't the science or anything that made you question it.
Wasn't the
It just
science.
was reading the story made you think.
It was reading the stories and
Mm.
starting to make a connection with the writers who wrote the story. Like, these writers are not trying to tell me that these two people were the original
Wow.
people, and because
Wow.
they sinned, everything fell apart from
Right.
there. And
Right.
that's just not Hebrew thinking. That's not how these people were even. They didn't think of sin the way we thought of sin. They
Right.
didn't think of
Right.
eternity the way Christians thought of
Mm,
eternity. I noticed that these men were more concerned about their
mm,
seed, their name living on through a male birth, the
mm,
birth of a male son.
mm.
And you go to wonder why Adam
Yeah.
and Eve's daughters are not even mentioned. It's just about these two males.
Right.
And and so it just, I
Mm,
mean, I in so many ways,
mm-hmm.
I connected with the culture at
Wow.
that time, the way these ancient people were thinking, and it began to dawn on me more and more that these are a ethnic group of people who are
Mm,
trying to preserve their history
yeah.
for their generation about their relationship with a God that they had perceived.
Wow. So you basically had deconstructed the
I was
link between the Old and the New
in.
Testament,
Hmm.
but somehow still holding on to Jesus.
Yeah, I was holding on to Jesus, and I can say I did it because I didn't know anything else.
Okay.
I honestly did. I honestly didn't. Since
Mm,
I was a child,
mm,
I had been seeking for
yeah.
what I conceived in my mind, God.
Mm-hmm.
And then this
Mm,
reality, or
mm,
the conception, the theory had become a reality
yeah.
when I was introduced to Jesus through the Christian
Right.
preaching and
Mm,
doctrine.
mm,
I
mm.
know nothing else.
Right.
How can I abandon
Wow.
Jesus and God? I'd rather you all come with me in this journey, and I just
Mm,
start talking with you about, why is this?
mm,
Wait a minute. So
mm.
it was hard for me, man. I'm
No,
not.
this is a beautiful story, man. Like the way you introduced your first thoughts of God and the way you're clinging to that, even as though as these other things are falling apart. This story is so beautiful here. So how does it get to the point then, as you're holding on to the only thing that you know, which is Jesus?
Mhm.
How do you get to the point where you end up saying bye to Jesus?
Christian history.
What do you
Christ,
mean?
I studied Christian history. I started to look back at the conception,
Mm,
how it all started. And when I tell you I took things literally in the
mm.
Bible, when Jesus said, a kingdom divided against
Mm,
itself cannot
mm,
stand, when Jesus says, behold, if two or three of you are gathered in my name, there I will be in the midst.
mm,
As I began to see
mm,
conflicts even before the Jesus had died and resurrected, there was already conflict. And then I started looking at early Christian history, and I saw this argument on the person of Jesus, his divinity, and I'm thinking, where is Jesus in all of these conversations that these men are having and literally excommunicating one another about? Why isn't Jesus speaking to them? Where's the Holy Spirit? Where's that Acts chapter 3 situation where the Spirit came to unify the church, to give birth to the church? And then Jesus tells Pontius Pilate, hey, look, my kingdom is not of this earth. If it was so, angels would come. And then I see the church now marrying the Roman Catholic, the church is now married to, to Rome, when Constantine is the presiding over a debate on the divinity of Jesus. I was done. Not to mention, as I continue to study history, Christian history, I see a clear divide. I see Christianity clearly being embraced and taking hold in Europe and not in other parts of the world. And I hate when people try to talk, well, there was Christians, Ethiopians. Yeah, but come on. We already know how this story goes. I was just disappointed with Christian history, just the horrifying accounts of even the reformers. I don't want to sketch around too much, but when I was introduced to PCA, I started studying the reformers more, like John Calvin. These men were revered. I mean, Martin Luther was revered, although he's not a Calvinist. He's still revered as that leader, if you will, of protesting, Roman Catholicism and all those things, and just the vile things that came out of their mouth about ethnic Jews, or things that that John Calvin did to create a church state, where he was governor of a church state and he was responsible for the execution of someone who disagreed with him. These things infuriated me. Totally, I was just like, I don't see Jesus and his kingdom at work in all of this, man.
So then, okay, I still have the question then, why buy Jesus and not just buy these certain Christians? Like, why not just say bye to the Eastern Church or the Western Church or this version of Christian? Like, why?
Because Jesus is responsible for all of this. I lay the responsibility at his feet. I believed in your kingdom. There's a lot of things I did as a person I can say I dismissed. Even I would say oftentimes to myself, I'm a Christian before I'm a Black man. That's how sold out I was about Jesus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That I would ignore any kind of racial hot topics. I wouldn't touch that button. I wouldn't push that button, because I'm a Christian before I'm a Black man in America. So if I only associate more with Christians than I do with my own ethnicity. That's how sold out I was. So you can imagine a person who after 30 plus years have kind of ignored or had blinders on, because hey, eternal life is all that matters. Being a citizen in this kingdom is all that matters. I don't care if you're Black, white, green, yellow. You need to be a citizen of this kingdom, because the king can resolve all of these issues through us by infilling us with his spirit, so we can go forth and unite the world under this kingdom. So once I saw that,
let's go back to the beginning of your testimony.
Okay.
You said you saw children who had, whether it be intellectual defects or birth defects, and you wanted there to be somebody powerful enough to change that. You saw homeless people. You said there's got to be somebody powerful enough. Now here you are 40 years later, looking at church history, looking at all these things and saying, isn't there somebody powerful enough to fix this? And the fact that no one's fixing it leads you to say, either Jesus wants it like this, or Jesus can't do anything about this. Either way.
He don't exist at all.
Or he don't exist at all.
Yeah. And I come to the conclusion, he doesn't exist at all.
Wow.
Because you can't fix your own kingdom. You can't resolve it. I mean, even today we're still debating about one Trinity, and don't get me started about the Trinity. I don't want to deflect into all the theological.
Every time I see a Christian on Facebook posting about some debate that they're on this side or that side, I'm so thankful that I don't have to care about any of that anymore.
Yeah.
The time I wasted but then, like you're saying, here we are still arguing about all these things. Where's Jesus to fix it? Where's Jesus? Now, what if somebody says to you, no, he's going to, like, that's what the whole, that he's going to come back, and he's ambassador, right? One of our group members. He's going to come back and fix it. He's going, Jesus is going to come back and fix it all. One day we won't cry no more. Whatever. Why is that not enough
I'll tell you the hypocrisy in that, because it's hypocrisy. So the very same Jesus that has supposed to allegedly giving you the most powerful experience on earth, a born again experience. Now we can talk, the born again experience has to be, if it was real, the most powerful phenomenon to take place, where you are literally transformed as a human being from this wretched sinner who can't stop lusting, can't stop cussing, can't stop lying, can't stop killing, or whatever it is that you, whatever. That is the most powerful experience known to man, if it was real. If that experience cannot then generate more life-changing events on the earth where all men can witness it, then the hypocrisy of Jesus gonna do it later is BS. I would just keep it clean, but that's BS.
We can curse on the show. It's all good.
Hey, don't tell me you're a born again Christian, and then you're gonna tell me Jesus gonna do something later. So you're gonna get saved later? Was your salvation is gonna be a later event? And some Christians will tell you, yeah.
They'll say it's already and not yet. That's the hypocrisy. That's the hypocrisy.
Already, but not
talking
yet.
out both sides of your mouth. It's already, but it's not yet.
Not
yet. That's how you get out of ever having to prove that it's actually happened.
Exactly. So I laid the responsibility of all of this foolishness within Christianity, over 44,000 denominations, whatever the number is, and maybe growing. I laid it all at his feet. I said, you told Pontius Pilate that your kingdom was not of this earth. I mean, I really started having conversations with Bible Jesus, because I was like, where's your leadership? Where's the Holy Spirit? Don't tell me that the Holy Spirit is supposed to be this all-powerful comforter that you left for the Christian kingdom or church to possess, but yet there's a white person right now saying he's filled with the Spirit, couldn't sit at the same table with me because of my skin color. Don't tell me that the Holy Spirit was at work when my ancestor was taken through the Atlantic slave trade over here by Christians, who even after abolitionists began to debate with them about this whole enslavement of people, that they still maintain that we're gonna keep this the way it is. I don't want to hear it, man.
But they'll say to you, I mean, Paul had to get at Peter because Peter wouldn't sit with those who were not circumcised Jews, and Paul had to get with him and say, hey, so it's possible to be redeemed, spirit-filled, if Peter was spirit-filled at that moment, and still not get it right.
No, it's possible that the Spirit never filled neither one of them, and that they had their own gospels. They had two different versions of what they considered the gospel, and Paul just simply hijacked a movement. And because he was a little more articulate and Hellenized, he can express to a Hellenized world his view of the gospel, as opposed to Peter's version, which would have required some uncircumcised Gentiles to get that meat cut off, that foreskin cut off. And Paul's like, my kingdom ain't gonna work with that. So I'm gonna stick to my gospel.
Well, I wonder why Paul was so much more successful.
I wonder why. Oh, he was an educated Hellenist. I mean, he was a Hellenized Jew.
Yeah. So was there a moment for you when you knew, it's over? Like when it hit you that you don't believe anymore?
Yeah. It hit me when my son, who at the time was 25 and very involved in the church that we had joined, it was a Reformed Baptist church. When he began to ask questions, and I'm a type of person. If I don't know, I don't know, and if I do know, I'm gonna say, I can't rationalize that, or I can't. It just the square peg is not fitting in the triangle, right? It's just not working. This is not working. So it's like, well, I have questions about certain theological positions that I hold, and even my church family holds, my pastors are holding, and on top of that, I take issue with just some of the things that we've learned about church history, just So my son began to ask these questions. I had to give him the raw truth that, son, I don't know, or yeah, you're right about that. He's like, then if that's the case, I need to meet with the pastor and let him know I'm out. Yeah. And he
He wasn't
recorded the
wasting no
conversation.
time.
He wasn't wasting no time. He recorded the conversation. He recorded the conversation with the pastor and the elders. And he was like, I appreciate you all's time, but I'm out. I'm
didn't
no
just mean
longer a
out
Christian.
of, oh, wow. Okay,
Yeah,
I was going to
I'm
ask.
no longer a Christian. I've had the conversation I need to have with you, Pastor, and I had the conversation I need to have with the elders. And because I was so highly respected in that church, that's why they wanted the elders to even meet with him and have conversations with him. And of course, I'm next because they need to know, well, Chris, where do you stand? We know your son is left or he's leaving the church and the faith. Where do you stand? And I just had to tell him. I don't see any continuity that will keep me here as a Christian. So yeah, I'm out. I'm out too.
And you had never really said that to yourself
I
before. You
never
were
really said.
still hanging on by a string.
Yeah, I was hanging on by a string, but my son's boldness, his boldness to meet with, again, I've been a police officer. I've done some things, right? And I don't want to take any credit for it, but I will say I have taught my children to just talk, express, let's communicate, let's debate, if you will, or converse. And he had taken that which I have taught him, and he said, I'm taking it to the pastor. I'm taking it to the pastor.
What was the conversation like with you and that son after that meeting? Like,
oh, he told me, he said, yeah, it's over. And
no, I mean, once you had a similar meeting and ended up ending the same way, what was your next conversation with your son like?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good question. So you're not gonna be ready for this, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Because I had to recall, because I said I didn't prepare for this meeting. But what led me to leave Christianity was I was still holding on to God and to Jesus. I was kind of letting Jesus go a lot more than I was God. So now I'm saying I still believe in God. I want to adhere to whatever it is God wants me to do. So I can say that I started leaning towards being an Old Testament reader only, where I still believe that the Old Testament is still God's revelation of himself to mankind, yada, yada, yada. So I'm starting to really dismiss the New Testament writings, particularly Paul's writings. I'm thinking, this dude here, man, he is a cultural thief. I mean, he's literally he stole from the Hebrews what was theirs, and then he shared it with this Hellenized world who has no idea about this culture, no idea. But he's watered it down. He's done a lot to dissect and give bits and pieces of it. I mean, I just called him a what do you call what's the term here? I can't think of the terms right now. It's the opposite of covenant theology.
Dispensational?
Replacement theology.
Replacement. Oh,
yeah. He's replacing Israel with these converted Gentiles that he's now saying, you all are part of this family and promises and covenants. And so, yeah, it's replacement theology. He's the father. I would consider Paul the father of replacement theology, particularly in Galatians, when he starts talking about Hagar being well, he's associating Israel, ethnic Israel, with being, I forget the terms of how he describes it, but it's almost like they're not the children of promise, because you do away with the children of the flesh, but the children of the promise, the spiritual Israel, that's y'all. But my ethnic folks, they're not the children of the promise.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, so I was done with that.
Okay. All right. So back to the question. So your next conversation with the
with my
son, because you said I probably wouldn't believe this, but you were about to say something.
Yeah. So now my son and I, we're now looking at the Old Testament only.
Okay. Oh, okay.
That's our move.
So I'm out of Christianity.
Yep.
You and him both go to an Old Testament only. So this is
Old
even more
Testament
interesting
only
because I thought
approach.
you were saying you were done with it altogether. You're going back to the Old Testament then.
Yeah. So
Okay.
just kind of retrace my steps here. I don't see the continuity.
Mm-hmm.
I was holding on to Jesus, dismissing some of the prophecies that were sketchy
Mm-hmm.
and not real, not,
Mm-hmm.
they weren't authentic in that they couldn't fulfill what was said.
Mm-hmm.
So now that my son has, brought about these questions about the discontinuity, and he's saying, look, I can't buy this because, the midrash and all that stuff, that's not going to work for me. So we're now studying the Old Testament more.
Okay.
That's our new thing. We're going to
Okay.
study. And I say, because we're just trying to say, well, God's got to be in some of this. It can't
Mm-hmm.
be that these New Testament hijackers going to just take the Old Testament and it's still ours to read and learn from.
At this point, are you sharing this stuff with your wife? Where
Yes,
you
and
are?
she's
Okay.
freaking out majorly. She's
Wow.
freaking out majorly. Like
Wow.
she is. You talking about trauma?
Mm.
That's trauma.
Mm.
Yeah, that's trauma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. Yeah, it was very traumatic for my wife.
Mm.
Not so much for my children because
Yeah.
they don't mind asking the questions.
Well, let's help somebody with this. So it being traumatic for your wife, as the husband, father, all that, how do you like what kind of grace were you able, like how did you help your wife through that? Or was it just like, sorry, babe, I gotta go through this? Like,
No, no. I wasn't being rude at all. I think just her hearing me sound so different
mm-hmm,
was the biggest shock.
mm-hmm,
It's like you were preaching the gospel.
mm-hmm.
You were mastering Paul's gospel. You believed in predestination. You believed in the lamb slain before the foundation of the world. These are the things that you taught me, and now you're telling me
mm,
that they're all just
mm,
meaningless. That is a lot for any individual who have been, we're talking about 20 years into a marriage.
mm,
And now I'm saying all of this is a hoax.
mm.
It's not real. And I will never worship a man again. I
Mm.
never.
Wow.
This is not happening.
Wow.
And it was traumatic.
So you and your son leave the church. Does your wife keep going?
No, she leaves too.
Okay.
But
Wow.
just the fact that she's
Mm-hmm.
she's she's having to make this move.
Mm.
I will say this: my wife respects me as a
Mm.
person.
Okay.
The icing on the cake is the whole, the practice of the faith. And but as a man, as a person, I can say she generally just respected me.
Okay.
She knows that if you're gonna, I mean, you got your teeth in or your claws into something, it's because you really are passionate about it. You want to know the truth.
Mm.
So while it was traumatic, she knew, wait a minute, he's
Mm.
not the kind of guy to just flip flop. And
Mm.
I've known him for over 20 years. He's When it
Mm.
comes to just wanting to know the truth, he wants to know the truth. It was
Mm.
just hard for her to
Yeah.
embrace it so quickly
Yeah.
because it was all coming together for me a lot more
Mm.
faster than it could ever came for her.
Mm.
So and once I'm on something, I'm on. Hey, this is not real. I'm out. I'll
Mm.
never worship. And
Mm.
I never forget. I said I will never worship
Mm.
a God man again.
Mm.
Never. It will never happen. I said,
Mm.
is Jesus? Do you think Jesus God? And if you think Jesus God, then I will never worship him
Mm.
because he is
Wow.
not. He can't be God.
Mm.
He can't be God.
Mm.
Yeah, so it was rough.
So how long did you maintain your grip on the Old Testament before even that fell away? Or did it ever fall away?
Oh no, it fell away. So
So-
I don't read the Old Testament now. I can't tell you that in 3 years I may have read the Bible a few times, and when I
Mhm.
read it, I just instantly begin to criticize the foolishness. It's just like
So
none of this
how'd you
makes
get to
sense.
that point after studying the OT with your son? Like, and did he get to the same? I don't. You
Yeah,
don't have to. Okay.
I don't, yeah, but yeah, it was same conclusion.
Mm.
Um, God can't be
Mm.
in this. It
Mm.
just can't be in this. Like I said, the Adam and Eve, that's when the Adam and Eve story, those things start to unravel because now I'm
Okay.
reading just the Old Testament,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's just not making sense.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense if I was a Hebrew at that time and
Mm.
I didn't know how to make sense of my world. I need
Yeah.
something to help me make sense of my world.
Yeah. Mm.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But in this modern day and time, it just doesn't make sense.
And nobody's helping you come to these conclusions. This is just you
No.
reading and like, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not having any conversation. I couldn't quote you right now anybody that's, I
Mm.
don't know who agrees and who disagrees with me. You know, to be honest with you, if you told me a name, oh, so and so believe, I was like, oh, okay. That's why I think when we were, just
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
through chat, I was like, look, I don't want to be called an atheist. I
Mm.
don't know what that. I
Yeah.
know what it means, but I'm just the type of person where I just want to be me
Mm.
and be able to exercise my own intellectual
Mm.
abilities and come to my own conclusions.
Mm.
And if somebody happens to agree with me,
Right.
well, because I'm not looking to be a debater. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
looking to,
Mm.
go out in the world and start debating the world about
Yeah.
what I believe. But if you should have a conversation with me,
Mm-hmm.
I will let you know what I believe,
Yeah.
you know.
Mm.
But I
Was
can
there?
tell you
Yeah.
since, not to cut you off, but I can tell you since the time that I encountered your platform,
Mm.
I have been exposing myself more to people like Matt Dillahunty
Mm.
and not just because they're atheists or whatever. It's just I want to hear another perspective
Yeah.
on so I can be, if you will, a better person when it comes to articulating what I believe,
Okay.
or what how I approach what my worldview consists of.
Was there a straw that broke the camel's back with the Old Testament too, or was it just
Yeah.
after enough study that you just felt like it's
Well,
not
yeah,
doing
there
it?
was plenty that broke the back. It was, the whole point of enslaving people.
Okay.
The whole
Mm.
point of being able to, when you conquer somebody, you take the women and shave their heads, let them mourn for their loved ones, and
Mm.
then hey, you can have your way with them.
Mm.
You can't divorce them, but you can have your way with them.
Mm.
It was, I saw a misogyny, a
Mm.
patriarchal system that just God can't be a part of this.
You saw the
It
human
just
fingerprints.
There you go. That's Thank you for this, because I just saw too much of
Mm.
men being in control of the patriarchal society that
Mm.
governed. God, did you mean tell me
Mm.
your laws consist of men being able to
Mm.
rape women after they mourn for the whole thing just is
Mm.
like, no,
Yeah.
God can't be a part of this.
Mm.
One minute
Wow.
God loves you, he's in love with Israel. The next minute he hates them, so he allows their women to be conquered and raped. And
Mm.
it's like, this cannot be the works of a,
Mm.
at least not the God that I had imagined or envisioned when
Right.
I was 6 and 7 years old.
Mm. Mm.
So
Mm.
yeah, that I was
Wow.
done with that.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. I love
Yeah.
how that just came together.
Yeah.
Um, I often say it's funny the way that God is presented in our churches. He's presented much more glorious than he appears in the text.
Yeah.
And so when I had to reconcile the God in the text with the God that I was presented with, I'm like, these aren't the same people.
They're not.
I could worship the one that I was presented with because the story makes sense. When I go in this text, the story
Yeah.
doesn't make sense anymore.
Right. I
Yeah.
can't be more moral than God.
How about that?
If I'm more moral than God, then he's not God.
Mm.
And I would tell, I would use this perfect example. I would tell my wife, I say, hey, look,
Mm.
um, if my eldest son is to die, right,
Mm-hmm.
and he's married, but he doesn't have a son, in the event that he dies, he doesn't have a son, then our youngest son will have to marry his wife, and
Mm.
then the first son that she conceives would be our deceased son's child, so his name can live on forever. I said, do you want to abide by that law? I said, because it does. If anything's written in this Bible
Mm.
that can't be applied today, that means somewhere we've
Mm.
either evolved
Mm.
morally greater than this situation, or we
Mm.
should be applying the same things today. And if we can't
Mm.
do it, then I can't be more moral than God. I just can't
Mm.
be. And say I'm going to
Wow.
worship the God that if I can bring accusation or indictment to the
Mm-hmm.
God of the Bible
Mm.
God, that
Mm.
means
Wow.
something's wrong with that picture.
Yeah. Wow. And now, and you said, so you don't like to be called agnostic, atheist. You don't like the labels. I think you said something in our text. You said something that I liked. You
I'm a
said,
truth seeker,
just
right?
I'm just a truth
I'm
seeker.
just a truth seeker and a good lie detector. Like I'm looking,
That's
hey,
what it
if
was.
you lie to me, red
That's what it
flags are going to
was.
go up,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to
Mm.
philosophy and
Mm-hmm.
religion. Man, it's
Yeah.
just like, stop it. I don't
Mm.
care how smart and intelligent you're. If you can't present evidence
Mm.
for why you believe what you believe, and
Mm.
the only evidence that I knew of at the time as a
Mm.
Christian was that infilling power of the Holy Spirit, where,
Mm.
hey,
Mm.
if God is real, then I should be able to lay my hands on you according to the literal text, and
Mm.
you be healed. I should be able. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm a rattlesnake handling Christian, but when you got corrupt, crazy text like that in Matthew 16 chapter, drinking poison and being able to pick up snakes, and you see people literally following this, don't mock those people because it's in your text.
Right.
How do you justify the actual writing of these texts and then mock somebody who decides, hey, I believe God said it, I can do that?
So you hinted at this at the beginning of the program. How do you now look back at the fact that you spoke in tongues, you gave words of knowledge, you prophesied and all that? How do you look back at that stuff now?
All right, I'm glad you asked that question. So I'm gonna give the raw truth here.
Yes, go.
And listen, I'm not a psychologist, so for those intellectuals out there who are well versed in the field of psychology, please forgive me in advance. But I'm gonna coin it induced psychosis.
Okay.
In other words, it was all in my head. The same way I envisioned a God who could heal and change the world for good is the same induced psychosis that said, I am filled with the Spirit. I am speaking in tongues. It was no spirit that caused me to do these things. It was a self-induced psychosis that says, I am a child of God. I can do these things. I do hear the voice of God. I mean, who is talking to me?
For the person watching, could you consider, because you probably would say this about somebody else's spiritual experience if they're a Buddhist or if they're a, it's funny because when Christians see Muslims and Buddhists having these experiences, they say one of two things. Either it's a real experience and it's the devil, or they will be with you and say, oh no, that's psychosomatic.
Yeah, psychosomatic. Okay.
Christian, could you even consider that the things that you're telling yourself, I know God spoke to me, I know that, could you even consider that it could be psychosomatic?
Yeah,
the human mind is that powerful to give itself those kinds of experiences if it wants them.
Yeah, and it's self-induced.
Yeah,
it was nothing outside of myself. I would not even put that responsibility on anyone else because you can't get into my mind. You can't get into whatever exists inside of me.
Right.
It was all.
But we can set the stage for you to do that to yourself. We can play the music.
Enhance it.
Yeah.
You could set it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can enhance it. Right. So just like, certain drugs can enhance what you're already conceived.
Yeah.
But I can't blame the drug. Just like I can't blame the smoke and the excellent worship music and musicians. I can't blame them for that. They're just helping me.
Right. Wow.
They're assisting me in what I'm already wanting to do.
Wow.
So that's why I won't blame the church for my.
I get it. I get it.
I just won't do it.
So last question, I think here.
Okay.
What do you don't want to be called agnostic atheist, you're a truth seeker and a lie detector, but I'm curious, what do you do with God? You started as a kid saying there must be somebody bigger, powerful, able to help us do X, Y, and Z. Well, now what do you do with God?
That's a good question. So I am standing by waiting for evidence for God. That's what I'm doing. So I am not going to dismiss him or her or they, because I don't know. It could be 2, 3, 1. I don't know. But until they're able, whoever they are, who wants to be respected by me as God, they are going to have to present themselves as such.
Gotcha.
And so, I'm not going to say there's no God or there is a God. So I guess that would be agnostic. I mean, that would be the best way to describe my position. But yeah, so that's where I stand with God. They need to present themselves. Yeah, they need to present themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, he, she, they need to present themselves.
The afterlife?
I don't know because I've never been in afterlife. So
fear of it, hope for it.
I don't hope for the afterlife.
Okay. Fear of hell?
Doesn't exist.
Okay.
It just doesn't. I mean, it exists in somebody's mind, right? Somebody invented the idea of hell, so it does exist in somebody's mind. It just doesn't exist in mine. Yeah, it's a concept that exists in somebody's mind, and it seems like it was more like in that ancient Greek time, or because I don't remember the Hebrews thinking of hell. That just said Sheol, a place where their dead would rest.
Right.
So I mean, it's an ancient myth. Yeah.
3 years you've been without a fear of hell, without a active belief in God, without a Bible, Old or New Testament. What's life like after faith for you?
Similar to like it was when I was in the faith. I get up, go to work. I still got mouths to feed. I got
Okay.
children to educate. I got
Mm,
bills to pay. I got
mm,
a life to live. I'm going on vacation to Belize in a couple of
mm.
months or weeks, and I vacate, and I find ways to decompress from the busy work schedule
Okay.
that I have or work life I have. I'm
Mm,
self-employed, but I'm busy all the
mm.
time. But yeah, so I mean, the- no, I can't say this. I do curse now.
Okay.
Not as much. I don't curse a lot, but
Okay.
I notice when I get angry,
All right.
I do curse sometimes. Like, wow, okay. I
Okay.
didn't know that was in me. But yeah, so, but yeah, other than that,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see a significant um
Mm,
change in who I am as a person. But I will tell you this.
mm,
Um, I would be willing to roll my sleeves back
mm,
and get more involved with challenging,
mm,
if you will, the Christian premise
mm,
that's out there in society because I devoted so much of my time to it
mm.
that I feel like
Yeah.
I owe it to now use my
Mm,
intellectual capacities that I was using as a Christian
mm,
to refute the foolishness of it all.
mm.
Right. I
Wow.
mean, because I just want to be, and it's not to be mean or vindictive,
Hmm.
but it's like I think I owe it
Mm. I can relate.
to society,
I can relate.
especially, I mean, certain demographics. I'm gonna be honest. I just feel like I just owe it to them to just be
Mm,
like,
mm.
we've been bamboozled.
Well, this could be a part two, but I'm so tempted to ask it. Like, why not just let people keep believing?
Why not let people keep believing? That has to be a part two.
Okay.
Because in all honesty, I don't know if I've given much thought to that, to
Gotcha.
really give a clear,
Mm-hmm.
articulable answer.
Mm.
But I'm a fighter.
Mm.
I feel like I'm a defender.
Yeah.
That's just kind of like in my nature. That explains probably why I was a police officer for so many years because
Mm.
I just want to be able to protect and defend, and
Mm.
I'm like that with my kids and my
Yeah.
wife. So it's almost like I
Well,
don't
that's why
know.
you wanted God in the first place. You wanted God to
Yeah, yeah,
help
exactly.
defend and protect and heal. And
Yes, right.
so
I cried. Like as a child, I remember sobbing,
mm,
just trying to empathize and
yeah.
sympathize with the suffering in the world. I cried as a child. I'm
Mm.
serious, man. It was real for me. The
So,
desire to want to save or help was
right.
real.
Well, see, to me, the reason why you won't, when you say you're ready to roll up your sleeves and get in and kind of help rescue people from this particular religion, if not religion in general, to
Mhm.
me, it ties in. It's the protector in you. You want to protect people from falsehood. You want to protect people from lies, even.
Yeah,
It
I
makes
agree
sense to
with you.
me.
Yeah,
Makes
and I'm
sense.
glad you kind of helped me flush that out because at the time I know my who I am as a person.
Hmm.
Like I can do this for hours. Literally, I would
Mm.
if it took hours not to convince somebody, but to get them to exercise their
Mm.
intellect,
Yeah.
like please turn it on.
Mm.
Like stop numbing your intellect. Stop
Mm.
thumbing yourself down by saying you are believing something, but you can't really articulate it. You can't give any kind of intellectual perspective to it. I just want to believe it.
Mm.
To me, you're belittling your own capacity, your own
Right.
who you are as a person. So just think with me.
Yeah.
Robbie Zachariah used to have this television, podcast called "Let My People Think."
Hmm.
Now I want to take that and go
Mm.
think.
Can we,
Let's think.
can we just talk about this real quick? Like,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I remember sitting with some of my former professors, and I'm not going to say which ones, certain ones in particular, but I can relate to that feeling you had of saying, man, these are my intellectual betters.
Mm-hmm.
They know Hebrew, they know
Mm-hmm.
Greek, they've been doing apologetics for decades and all that. I can remember having some trepidation about, can I share my doubts with them? This is after I've already deconverted. I'm already, book is done and
Even
all that.
after, okay.
But I remember sitting across from several of them. I don't even know how to say this without sounding disrespectful. the people that I thought were my intellectual betters, because they've married themselves to this text that, to be honest with you, it's so ridiculous. Even if they are my intellectual betters, I almost find myself pitying them now, because they're talking to me as if this book is true. And so even when you talk about a Ravi Zacharias, I used to love C.S. Lewis. I read their stuff now and I'm like, this is nonsense. Like, I'm gonna talk real hood for a second. I'm like, I would trash one of y'all in a debate right now. Not because I'm smarter than you, but because you've married yourself to this idiotic text. And for the person that would say, it's the people who marry themselves to the text in a fundamentalist way that that's more idiotic than the progressive Christian that wants to say, oh no, it wasn't literal, it was, it was a polemic, or it was metaphor. But okay, that's less idiotic. But
It's
then
still idiotic
right,
nonetheless.
you've got your issues too. So anyway, I just say that to say, when you mention some of these names, I'm like, yeah, like these are the people who used to help us think we were thinking.
Exactly.
Let my people think.
Let my people think. And no, they were
Right.
not allowing us to think. They were actually
Yeah.
indoctrinating us more and more, saying, don't think, just
Right.
listen to me and listen to the soliloquy, and you will know just how intellectually sound I am and my knowledge in this text. When in fact, when you really look down to it, it's no better than Star Wars. I mean, it's no better than Game of Thrones. It's no better than, any of the
It's
fantasy.
worse.
Yeah, it's worse, right? Yeah, it's darker. It's like,
it's darker, it's dumber in some. I don't want to get disrespectful, but
right,
because like you said, because of the way the stories don't connect,
right,
you're blending, at least, what's his name? Lucas, Star Wars, at least his story connects.
Yeah, they
Even when
connect.
he gives you prequels, they
Right.
connect. Your Old Testament, compilers of the text, they're sewing this text with that text, and this is a different story than this story. And like, this is what you want me to take as the word of God.
As the word of God. Man. And so I do have a righteous indignation in me.
Yeah.
and I really need to prepare myself more, I think, with just being able to relate and converse on that level. So, like I said, that's why I have been so relieved to see, former Christians like yourself online. And now I can connect, in a small way too, because I don't have community. I mean, I literally just have my immediate family, which are all Christians or in some degree believe in God. And then that's it. And,
If you don't want to answer this, I'll even take out the fact that I asked it, but I'm just curious. You and your son that was going through the Old Testament with you, is he out of the Old Testament altogether as well? Is he out of it?
he is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How has your wife adapted to the you that's not even now you're no Bible? How does she adapt to that?
She listens to me go on and on when she allows me the space.
Okay.
Because it's bottled up. So she knows if I press this button, Chris is going to continue to go on and on with his indictment against God. Because I'll tell her, I'll take issue with your God. Can you ask your God why these particular things are going on?
Wow.
I take issue with your Jesus. Can you ask your Jesus respectfully why this is going on? Can you ask your Jesus to explain 400 years of slavery? Can you ask your Jesus to explain how there's a black church and a white evangelical church and how they accept these terms that have been given to them by politics? If you can explain these things to me, then maybe I would reconsider the idea that Jesus is real or that he's in control. But his kingdom is divided, and I can't follow a divided leader. I'm just not going to do it, especially a God man. It ain't happening. No. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Chris, man, thank you for sharing your story. And let me just encourage you. Yes, do that. Do what you said. If you need to get more in terms of under your belt, in terms of what are the terms that we're using to describe, I'll never forget, I was trying to describe the hiddenness of God. And it wasn't until maybe about a month before I was about to go public with my deconversion that another person who's a former cross movement fan, but he deconverted way before I did, he sniffed it out. He saw my Facebook post and said, I think something. So he started sending me Matt Dillahunty videos. And the first Dillahunty video I watched, he gave vocabulary to what I was trying to describe. And it was the hiddenness of God. And I said, okay, so there are people out there who've thought through this already before I did.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah,
Yes, sir.
Get that stuff under your belt, get the vocabulary and all that. But let me just tell you, the way you express where you stand right now and how you got there, you do a well enough job to have this conversation with any and everybody, I think. So if you're going to roll up your sleeves, I encourage you. I think you do an excellent job of articulating where you are and why you're there.
Oh, thank you. So I was really glad that you were able, because I know you were busy. You got some things going on that I can appreciate. So I just gonna say, any way I can support or help, you could just reach out to me, because I don't want this just to be, one-time conversation or interview. I mean, my anticipation is that, your efforts will grow, similar to, and I don't want to compare it, but like similar to like Myth Vision, how because he's been doing this for years, like,
Yeah. No, it's funny. He just told me the other day. He told me this before, but I didn't realize it. Yo, this brother deconverted, I think like 3 years ago. Like he's been doing this for just the last couple of years, and in that time, he has grown like
he's grown
ridiculously.
Right.
Yeah, craziness.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know what I'll do. I don't know how much longer I'll be doing this, but here's one thing I will say to you. If you ever come across anything that you feel like you want to discuss this issue, feel free, like, hey, can we just get on and do, like, we could get on and just do a live conversation about some issue that you felt is worth talking about. That'll be a way to, just come on the platform and share.
Yeah, that'd be great. And yeah, because you know what, it's weird. I can actually articulate things better when I write them.
Okay.
As opposed to when I'm talking.
Okay.
I don't know why, but
yeah,
it's just,
I think I'm the same way. I'm the same way.
In words, I mean, and because the words will come to me, the terms that I do know will come to me. But I guess just when I'm kind of in a conversation,
gotcha,
it may not necessarily come up, but give me just a few minutes to write down what I'm
well,
saying.
because when you're writing, you get a chance to self-edit, and you get a chance
there you go.
Whereas when you're speaking, like I'm always self-editing as I'm speaking, and so I'll stutter and you try to get the words out. But if you give me, like you said, some time, I can give you a nice little.
Yeah, I'll give you a nice presentation. Yeah.
But yeah, man. So if you think of anything that you feel like, hey, here's how I can pitch in, or I'd like to get on and talk about whatever. If I think of anything, I definitely will hit you up. But the door's open. I love to see more Black and brown faces deconverting, helping our people not live their lives in slavery to a myth.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, hey, thank you, man, for sharing this. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of people, because in our communities, Joe, you don't deconvert, you don't question God, and I think, actually, I haven't said this to many people. Me and Jay would talk about this. I think one of the reasons why my channel is so slow to grow is because we're Black and brown people. Like if you're white and you deconvert and you put up this, you'll be in the thousands before you know it. But you know what I mean?
It may be some facts to that particular statement. Because you look at the statistics of the number of Black and brown people who still hold on to religion and faith. The numbers are astronomical, like 80%, and we're making up less than 13-14% of the overall population. Staggering statistics.
Superstition.
Staggering.
We're a superstitious people, and because we're in a position to need that superstition. I don't want to say more than I do think a disproportionate number of us are in a position where
absolutely.
we feel like we need that.
We need an explanation to why we are suffering, why we lack, and we need to know that somebody's in our corner, and that started generations ago when you're
Yep.
trying to understand why you are
Yep.
getting whipped and picking this cotton.
And like you said, that's what Israel was doing, right? We're trying to understand why we can't defeat these people, why
Right.
we can't get our land back, or land that we think should be ours. We got to tell ourselves a story to explain this to ourselves.
Absolutely. Man, that's so true. And there's no way around it. It's just like, there's no way around that explanation. It's like, how else would, if you keep it within its context and keep it within, it's a history,
right,
of sorts,
that's what ideology is.
Yeah.
You tell history in a way that explains why things are the way they are, even if that history is not true.
Even if it's not true.
That's ideology.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the thing that makes it prove to be ideology is, like you said, because if it's more than that, then why isn't that God doing those things now?
Right, exactly. Why is
he's relegated to the past? That's why I call him book God. You want to see him act, go to the book.
Right. Yeah. Other than that, there will be no more parting of the Red Sea. There will be there won't be no more manna from heaven. That is just not gonna happen. Ain't nobody gonna get a snake and put on a pole and everybody will be healed by looking at a snake. It's just not. Snakes don't talk. We can go on and on, right?
Well, hey, much love to you, man.
Yes, sir.